The auctioneer's hammer struck the wooden block with a finality that echoed through Ash Hollow's dusty square like a death knell. Ada Whitlow stood rigid, her jaw set against the February cold and the injustice unfolding before her eyes. The Whitlow Ranch. 60 acres of good grazing land her late husband had worked until his lungs gave out, sold for a pittance to the Northern Pacific Railway Company. "Sold!" bellowed Judge Silas Dorn from his makeshift podium, his thick fingers already reaching for the next deed. The February wind whipped his gray whiskers, but his small eyes remained fixed on Ada with predatory satisfaction. Ada's gloved hands clenched at her sides. Beside her, 12-year-old Finn pressed closer, his thin shoulders trembling whether from cold or fury. She couldn't tell. The boy had their father's stubborn chin and their mother's green eyes, now bright with unshed tears as he watched their home slip away. "That's our land," Finn whispered, voice cracking. "Pa worked that land." "Hush," Ada murmured, though her own throat burned with the same protest. Around them, the crowd of townspeople shifted uneasily. Some looked away in shame. Others watched with the hollow-eyed acceptance of those who'd learned not to fight the inevitable. The Copper Wolves Dorn's hired guns stood stationed around the square like carrion birds. Their leader, a scarred brute named McCready, spat tobacco juice near Ada's boots, his hand resting casual-like on his pistol grip. Judge Dorn descended from his platform with surprising grace for a man of his girth. His expensive coat, shipped from San Francisco, looked obscene against the backdrop of weathered storefronts and desperate faces. He approached Ada with the confidence of a man who owned not just the law, but the very ground beneath their feet. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, tipping his hat in mockery of courtesy. "A unfortunate business, losing one's home, but perhaps we might discuss alternative arrangements." Ada's spine stiffened. She knew what such arrangements entailed. She'd seen other widows accept Dorn's protection, only to become shadows of themselves, bound to his household in ways that turned her stomach. "I'd sooner bed down with rattlesnakes," she said, loud enough for the nearest townspeople to hear. Dorn's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Pride's a luxury you can't afford. My dear, not with a boy to feed and winter coming on hard. We'll manage. Will you?" He leaned closer, his breath reeking of cigars and whiskey. The sheriff mentioned some irregularities with the courthouse records, missing documents, tampering with official seals, serious accusations. Ada's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. Those documents, the ones that proved Dorn had been falsifying land claims, were hidden beneath the floorboards of what was no longer her home. "I don't know anything about missing papers," she said. "Of course not." Dorn straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his lapels. "Still, Sheriff Pike takes such matters seriously. He'll want to search your belongings before you leave town, for the sake of thoroughness." The trap was closing. Ada could feel it in the way the Copper Wolves shifted position, blocking casual exits from the square. She'd been fool enough to think she could gather evidence, that justice might prevail if she just documented Dorn's crimes carefully enough. Now that naivety would cost her everything. "Come on, Finn," she said, taking her brother's hand. "We need to pack what's ours." But as they turned to leave, Sheriff Pike emerged from the courthouse, his badge glinting in the pale winter sun. "Mrs. Whitlow, a word, if you please." Ada squeezed Finn's hand. "When I tell you to run," she whispered, "you run for the old mining road. Don't look back." "Ada, promise me." The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. Pike approached with 2 deputies flanking him. "Ma'am, we've had reports of theft from the courthouse. I'll need you to come with me for questioning." "On whose word?" Ada demanded. "That's official business." Pike's hand moved to his gun belt. "Come quiet-like, and this won't get ugly." Ada glanced around the square. The townspeople were melting away like snow in spring, unwilling to witness whatever came next. Even Mrs. Morrison, who'd brought soup when Henry was dying, turned her back and hurried into the general store. Run! Ada hissed to Finn, then louder. I've stolen nothing. She shoved Finn hard, sending him stumbling away, and in the same motion grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it in Pike's face. The sheriff cursed, pawing at his eyes, and Ada ran. Behind her, chaos erupted. Men shouted. Boots pounded on frozen earth. A gunshot cracked through the air, but Ada didn't look back. She hiked up her skirts and ran as she hadn't run since she was a girl, her boots slipping on patches of ice. The old mining road led north into the Badlands, where February's grip turned brutal. Ada's lungs burned with each breath of frozen air. She risked a glance back. No sign of Finn. Good. The boy knew these hills better than Dorn's men ever would. But they knew it well enough. Hoofbeats thundered behind her, gaining ground. Ada veered off the road, scrambling down a steep embankment toward the frozen creek. Her foot caught on a root, sending her tumbling. She hit the ice hard, pain shooting through her shoulder. Get up, get up, get up! She forced herself to her feet, but the riders were already cresting the embankment. 3 of them, with McCready in the lead, his scarred face twisted in anticipation. Ada ran along the creek bed, using the high banks as cover. The ice held, mostly, though she heard ominous cracks with each step. Behind her, a horse screamed the ice had given way. A man cursed violently. She scrambled up the far bank, her skirts heavy with snow and mud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, wind driving snow horizontal across the landscape. In minutes, visibility dropped to mere yards. A blessing and a curse. The storm would hide her, but it would kill her just as surely as Dorn's men if she didn't find shelter. Already. Her fingers were going numb inside her gloves. Ada pressed on, following what she hoped was the old trapper's trail. Her husband had shown it to her once. Years ago, there should be shelters along it, crude things built by men who'd hunted these hills before the railway came. Behind her, voices called out, muffled by the storm. They were casting about, having lost her trail, but they'd find it again. Men like that always did. Her foot struck something hard, a wooden post, nearly buried in snow. Ada dropped to her knees, feeling along it until she found what she was looking for, the carved notch that marked a shelter. She crawled in the direction the notch pointed, hands numb, shoulders screaming. There, a shadow against the white, a lean-to built against a cluster of boulders, barely visible in the storm. Ada stumbled toward it, praying it wasn't already occupied by wolves or worse. The door, if the collection of lashed branches could be called that, gave way to her desperate shove. She tumbled inside, gasping, shaking. The space was cramped but mercifully dry. Someone had been here recently. There was kindling stacked by a crude fire pit. And, "Don't move." The voice came from the shadows, deep and steady. Ada froze as a man emerged from the back of the shelter, a rifle trained on her. He was tall, lean in the way of men who lived hard and ate harder. Dark hair hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered half his face. But it was his eyes that held her gray as the storm outside, holding neither warmth nor cruelty, just assessment. "I'm not armed," Ada said through chattering teeth. "I just need—" "Quiet." He moved to the entrance, listening. After a long moment, he lowered the rifle slightly. "How many following you?" "3, maybe more. There's a boy, my brother. He ran the other way. He's only 12. If they catch him—" "They won't." The man studied her with those gray eyes. "Not in this storm. Your boy smart." "Yes. Then he'll find shelter. You're bleeding." Ada looked down, surprised to see red seeping through her coat at the shoulder. The fall had done more damage than she'd realized. The stranger set his rifle aside and approached. Up close, she could see the scars, a puckered line across his throat, others disappearing beneath his shirt. This was a man who'd seen violence and survived it. "Caleb Hart," he said, already working at her coat buttons with surprising gentleness. And you're Ada Whitlow. Seen you in town. You know me. Know of you. Widow running the old Whitlow place. Least you were until today. He peeled back her coat, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. Heard Dorn finally made his move. You were at the auction, watching from the hotel. Learned long ago to keep clear of Dorn's business. He produced a flask from his coat, poured whiskey over her wound without warning. Ada bit back a scream, stars exploding behind her eyes. Needs stitching, Caleb said. But that'll wait. First, we deal with your friends outside. As if summoned. Voices carried on the wind. Closer now. Caleb moved with economical grace, checking his rifle, positioning himself by the entrance. They'll track me here, Ada whispered. Let them try. There was something in his voice, a quiet confidence that spoke of experience. This storm's fixing to be a bad one. They push too hard. The mountain will take them. They won't give up. Dorn thinks I have evidence. She stopped herself, but Caleb's eyes sharpened. Do you? Ada hesitated, then nodded. Hidden. Documents that prove he's been stealing land, falsifying claims, working with the railway to... Hush. Caleb held up a hand. Outside, horses snorted and stamped. Men's voices carried on the wind. McCready's harsh growl recognizable even through the storm. Saw her come this way. Check the shelters. Caleb pulled something from his pack, a folded cloth that he pressed into Ada's hands. She looked down, surprised to find an embroidered handkerchief. Fine work that seemed at odds with the rough man beside her. For the bleeding, he said gruffly. Stay quiet. Stay down. He slipped out into the storm like a ghost. Ada pressed the handkerchief to her shoulder, listening to her heart hammer against her ribs. The cloth smelled of cedar and gunpowder. Minutes stretched like hours. The wind howled, driving snow through gaps in the shelter. Ada's wet clothes were freezing to her skin. Just when she thought she couldn't stand the waiting anymore, Caleb reappeared. Gone, he said, securing the entrance. Turned back. Even McCready's not fool enough to push through this blizzard. They'll wait for it to clear. Let them... Caleb knelt by the fire pit, working with practiced movements to coax flame from the dry kindling. By morning, the trail will be cold as a banker's heart. The fire caught, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. For the first time since the hammer fell at the auction, Ada felt a spark of hope. Thank you, she said. Caleb shrugged, feeding larger sticks to the growing flame. Not done yet. Need to tend that shoulder proper and figure what to do about your brother. Finn knows to head for Sister Eugenia's mission. She'll hide him. Smart boy. Caleb produced a needle and thread from his pack. This is going to hurt. Ada nodded, gritting her teeth. She'd endured worse. As Caleb worked, his hands steady and sure. She studied him in the firelight. The scars told a story of violence, but his touch was careful, almost gentle. You were a soldier, she said. It wasn't a question. Among other things, he tied off the thread, examined his work. You were a nurse. How did you? Way you held still, knew what I was doing, trusted the process. Plus, your hands. He nodded at them. Seen enough nurse hands to know. Ada flexed her fingers, noting the calluses, the chemical stains that never quite faded. The war. After, something flickered in his gray eyes. Red Switch. The name hit Ada like cold water. Red Switch, the massacre that had horrified even hardened frontier folk. An entire settlement wiped out, supposedly by raiders, though whispers spoke of darker truths. I'm sorry, she said. Caleb turned away, busying himself with the fire. Long time ago. Outside, the storm raged on. Ada shivered despite the growing warmth. Her clothes were soaked through, freezing in the places the fire's heat couldn't reach. There's blankets in my pack. Caleb said without looking at her. Need to get you dry or you'll catch your death. Ada hesitated. Propriety warred with survival, and survival won. She peeled off her wet outer garments, wrapping herself in the rough wool blankets. They smelled like horse and campfire and something indefinably male. What will you do? Caleb asked, feeding the fire. Dorn won't stop. Not now. I'll get those documents. Take them to the federal marshal in Helena. Long journey. Dangerous, especially with a boy. What choice do I have? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. There's another way, but it means trusting someone you just met. Ada pulled the blankets tighter. Outside, wind shrieked through the rocks like the voices of the dead. In the morning, she'd have to face Dorn's men again, find Finn, retrieve evidence that might already be destroyed. But tonight, in this crude shelter with a scarred stranger, she was alive. That was enough. Tell me, she said. And as the storm raged and the fire crackled, Caleb Hart began to speak of plans and possibilities, of justice delayed but not denied. Ada listened, her shoulder throbbing, her future uncertain, but her resolve hardening like ice. Dorn had made a mistake. He'd pushed her past fear into something harder and more dangerous. He'd given her nothing left to lose. Dawn broke pale and bitter over the frozen landscape. Ada woke to find Caleb already up, melting snow for coffee over the banked fire. Her shoulder throbbed with each movement, but the bleeding had stopped. Storm's past, he said without preamble. We need to move. Ada struggled upright, her body stiff from sleeping on cold ground. Through gaps in the shelter, she could see a world transformed by snow, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Finn... We'll find him. Caleb handed her a tin cup of bitter coffee. But first, we need to throw Dorn's men off our trail. He laid out his plan with military precision. They'd backtrack through Pine Creek, using the frozen stream to hide their tracks. Circle wide around Ash Hollow to approach Sister Eugenia's mission from the north. The nun ran a small medical dispensary neutral ground. Even Dorn wouldn't dare violate it openly. You know these hills well, Ada observed. Well enough. Caleb's expression gave nothing away. Spent time tracking through here, before. They broke camp swiftly. Caleb moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years living rough. He showed Ada how to wrap her feet in extra cloth for warmth, how to walk in his footsteps to disguise their numbers. The journey through the pine forest was a masterclass in frontier craft. Caleb led them along ridgelines where wind had scoured away the snow, through stands of evergreen so thick their passage barely disturbed the branches. Twice, they heard horses in the distance. Both times, Caleb guided them into hidden draws until the danger passed. You were a scout, Ada said during a brief rest. During the war. After, he scanned the horizon constantly, even while talking. Hired on with the army, tracking hostiles. They called it, mostly, I tracked scared people trying to hold on to their land. Is that why you left? His jaw tightened. Left when I saw what that tracking led to. Red Switch. The name hung between them like a ghost. Ada wanted to ask more, but something in Caleb's expression warned her off. By midday, they'd reached the outskirts of the mission. Sister Eugenia's dispensary sat in a grove of cottonwoods, smoke rising from its chimney. The building was modest but well-maintained, with a small garden plot and a stable. Wait here, Caleb said, handing Ada his rifle. If anything happens, fire once in the air, I'll come running. He approached the mission carefully, keeping to cover. Ada watched, impressed by how a man his size could move so quietly, after what felt like hours but was probably minutes. He emerged from the mission's front door, beckoning. Ada hurried across the open ground, her heart racing until she burst through the door and saw Finn. Her brother launched himself at her, nearly knocking her over. She held him tight, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. "I knew you'd come," he mumbled against her coat. "Sister Eugenia said you would." "Foolish boy, running off alone." "I wasn't alone." Finn pulled back, eyes bright. "Running Bear found me, led me here." Ada looked up to find an elderly crow warrior sitting by the fire, his weathered face impassive. Sister Eugenia stood beside him, her nun's habit incongruous next to his traditional dress. "So, Mrs. Whitlow." The nun's voice was warm but worried. "I'm glad you're safe. When young Finn arrived last night, we feared the worst." "I'm grateful, sister, more than I can say." "Gratitude can wait." Sister Eugenia was already moving toward Ada, noting the blood-stained coat. "That shoulder needs proper attention. Mister, Hart's field dressing is adequate, but you need real care." As the nun worked, cleaning and rebandaging the wound, Running Bear spoke for the first time. His English was careful but clear. "The judge's men search everywhere. They say you stole from the government. They offer much money for information." "I stole nothing," Ada said firmly. "But I have evidence of Dorn's crimes." Running Bear and Sister Eugenia exchanged glances. The nun sighed. "Evidence is only useful if you live to present it, and Judge Dorn has long arms." "Not as long as federal law," Caleb said quietly. "If we can get the documents to Helena." "If—" Sister Eugenia tied off the fresh bandage. "The roads are watched. The train stations, too. How do you propose to travel 300 miles through hostile territory in winter?" Running Bear shifted. Reaching into his pack, he produced a leather portfolio, worn but carefully maintained. Perhaps this helps. He opened it to reveal hand-drawn maps, incredibly detailed. But more interesting were the papers beneath: ledgers, contracts, survey documents, all bearing official seals, all showing discrepancies in land claims. "How did you—" Ada breathed. "My people watch. We remember." Running Bear's dark eyes held centuries of witness. "The Iron Horse cuts through treaty land. The judge says we agreed. We did not." Ada studied the documents with growing excitement. Combined with what she'd hidden, this was damning. Proof of a conspiracy that went beyond simple land theft to treaty violations and government fraud. "This is enough to bring down Dorn," she said. "Maybe even his backers in the railway company." "If it reaches the right hands," Sister Eugenia cautioned. "Judge Dorn has friends in Helena, too." "Then we go past Helena," Caleb said. "There's a federal investigator in Billings, Sam Morrison. He's been sniffing around the edges of this for months. Just needed proof." "You know him?" Ada asked. "We've crossed paths." Caleb's expression was unreadable. "He's honest. More important, he's stubborn. Once he bites into something, he doesn't let go." They spent the rest of the day planning. Sister Eugenia provided supplies: food, ammunition, medical supplies. Running Bear contributed his knowledge of trails and safe passages. But it was Finn who provided the most crucial intelligence. "I heard them talking," he said, perched on a stool while Sister Eugenia trimmed his shaggy hair. "McCready and his men, they think you're heading south, to Colorado. That's where they're concentrating the search." "Smart boy," Caleb murmured. "That gives us a window." As evening approached, a complication arose. Deputy Lyle arrived at the mission, alone and looking troubled. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons, but the deputy raised his empty hands. "Peace," he said quickly. "I'm not here for the bounty." "Then why?" Sister Eugenia asked, though she let him enter. Lyle removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. He was young, maybe 25, with an honest face that hadn't yet been hardened by frontier justice. "I became a lawman to help people," he said, addressing Ada directly. "Not to hunt widows and orphans for corrupt judges. What Dorn's doing, it ain't right." "Fine words," Caleb said coldly. "But you still wear his badge?" "Not after today." Lyle unpinned the star. set it on the table. I'm done being his dog. Question is, what can I do to help? They were skeptical, naturally, but Lyle had information they needed. Guard rotations, which roads were watched, where Dorn's men were concentrated. More importantly, he revealed something crucial. There's a special train coming through in 3 days. He said, private car, heading east, carrying documents from all the territorial offices to Washington, including sealed court records. Ada's pulse quickened. If we could get our evidence onto that train. It would bypass Dorn's entire network, Caleb finished. Go straight to federal authorities. The train stops at Cotton Rift for water. Lyle continued. Isolated spot, only a few guards, if someone were to encounter difficulties there. It was audacious, risky, but it was better than trying to fight through Dorn's men all the way to Billings. We'll need a diversion, Caleb said, already thinking tactically. Something to draw off Dorn's men. Leave that to me, Running Bear said unexpectedly. My people have grievances. Perhaps it is time to air them. Loudly. Sister Eugenia shook her head but smiled. I suppose I should pray for forgiveness for what I'm about to aid and abet. Pray for success, sister, Ada said. Justice delayed is justice denied. They refined the plan late into the night. Running Bear would stage protests at the railroad offices, drawing attention and guards. Lyle would use his insider knowledge to misdirect the remaining searchers. Caleb and Ada would intercept the train at Cotton Rift. What about me? Finn demanded. You stay with Sister Eugenia, Ada said firmly. But no arguments. Her tone brooked no rebellion. I've already risked you enough. The boy subsided, but Ada could see the stubborn set of his jaw. She'd have to watch him carefully. As the others departed to make preparations, Caleb pulled Ada aside. You sure about this? Once we move, there's no going back. There's already no going back. Ada touched her wounded shoulder. Dorn made sure of that. This isn't just about land anymore. If these documents prove what we think, powerful people will want us silenced. Then we'd better not get caught. Something shifted in Caleb's gray eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. No, ma'am, we'd better not. Later, as Ada helped Sister Eugenia prepare evening meal, the nun spoke quietly. Mister, Hart is a good man, but a wounded one. Be careful. We're allies of necessity, nothing more. Sister Eugenia's knowing smile was irritating. In my experience, necessity makes the strongest bonds. Ada changed the subject, but the nun's words lingered. She found herself watching Caleb as he cleaned his rifle, noting the careful way he moved, the alertness that never fully faded. What had Red Switch cost him? What ghosts haunted those gray eyes? That night, bedded down in the mission's small guest room with Finn snoring beside her, Ada stared at the ceiling and thought about trust. She was putting her life and her brother's future in the hands of people she barely knew. A scarred tracker with a violent past, an elderly warrior with his own agenda, a deputy who'd worn corruption's badge until today. But what choice did she have alone? She was just a widow with stolen documents. Together, they might actually achieve justice. Outside, wind rattled the windows. In 3 days, they'd attempt something borderline insane, but for tonight they were safe, fed, warm, together. Ada touched the handkerchief Caleb had given her, now washed and folded beneath her pillow. Such fine work, delicate embroidery, a mystery, like the man himself. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about how his hands had been gentle when he'd stitched her wound. Tried not to wonder what kind of man carried both rifle and embroidered linen. 3 days, then they'd either win justice or lose everything. But at least they'd fight. That had to count for something. In the darkness, Finn stirred. Ada. What is it? We're going to win, aren't we? She pulled him close, feeling the bird-rapid beat of his heart. Yes, She lied with all the conviction she could muster. "We're going to win." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their tracks, hiding their secrets, buying them time. But time, Ada knew, was a luxury they couldn't afford. Dorn was out there, searching, and men like him didn't give up easily. The real fight was yet to come. The wind howled across Cotton Rift like a living thing, driving ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Ada pressed herself against the rocky outcrop, watching the railroad tracks stretch into the gray distance. Beside her, Caleb checked his pocket watch for the third time. 20 minutes, he murmured. Running Bear's distraction should be starting about now, as if summoned by his words. Smoke rose in the distance, black columns against the pewter sky. The Crow warriors were burning hay bales near the railroad company offices, just as planned. Nothing too destructive, but enough to demand attention. There, Ada pointed to dust clouds approaching from the south. Riders leaving town. Dorn's men. Good. Caleb shifted, checking his rifle again. That leaves maybe 4 guards on the train, maybe 5. 4 or 5 armed men. Ada's mouth went dry. The Navy Colt at her hip suddenly felt inadequate, despite Caleb's patient instruction over the past 2 days. "So, remember," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "We're not looking for a fight. Quick and quiet. Get to the document car. Plant our evidence. Get out." "And if quick and quiet doesn't work?" His gray eyes met hers. "Then we do what we have to." They'd left Finn with Sister Eugenia, despite his protests. The memory of his angry tears still twisted Ada's heart, but she'd rather have him angry and alive than... No, don't think about the alternatives. A low whistle echoed across the rift Deputy Lyle's signal from his position near the water tower. The train was coming. Ada's heart hammered as she heard it before she saw it, the chug, chug, chug of the engine, the screech of metal on metal. Then it rounded the bend. A black iron beast breathing steam into the frigid air. It was smaller than she'd expected. Just the engine, tender, 2 passenger cars, and the document car at the rear. The federal government traveling light and fast. "Now we wait," Caleb said. The train slowed as it approached the water tower, brakes squealing. This was the crucial moment. Cotton Rift was perfect for their purposes isolated, with the necessary water stop, but the approach was treacherous. The train would have to come to a complete halt. As the engine drew alongside the tower, Ada saw the guards, 2 on the platform of the document car, rifles visible. At least 2 more would be inside. The engineer and fireman made 6 potential problems. Lyle emerged from his hiding spot, badge glinting despite his supposed resignation. He approached the engine, playing his part as a local deputy checking on the important train. "Now," Caleb whispered. They moved together, using the train itself as cover. The massive wheels and undercarriage hid them from the guards as they worked their way back. Ada's injured shoulder protested, but adrenaline drowned the pain. At the document car, Caleb produced a set of lockpicks. Where he'd learned that skill, Ada didn't want to know. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. "Government efficiency," Caleb muttered. They spent all their money on guards, none on decent locks. They slipped inside, Ada pulling the door closed behind them. The interior was cramped, lined with filing cabinets and locked boxes. A single lantern swayed with the train's subtle movements. "Find the territorial court records," Caleb said, already working on a cabinet lock. "Should be marked by region." Ada scanned the labels, her hands shaking slightly. Montana Territory, Wyoming Territory, Dakota Territory. So many documents, so many lives affected by what these papers said. Here, she found the right cabinet. Used the picks Caleb had taught her to use. Inside, hundreds of sealed documents awaited transport to Washington. Working quickly, they slipped their evidence inside Ada's stolen documents, Running Bear's treaty papers, even sworn statements Lyle had secretly gathered, each piece carefully placed to look like it belonged. "Someone's coming," Caleb hissed. Footsteps on the platform outside, a guard, making rounds. They pressed against the wall, barely breathing as the footsteps paused outside their door. The handle rattled, locked, from their side now. The guard muttered something, tried again, then, horrifyingly, called out, "Thompson, bring the keys. Document car's locked from inside." Caleb moved like lightning, pressing something into Ada's hands, the evidence they hadn't yet filed. "Hide this. No matter what happens, make sure it gets to the right people." "Caleb, go out the window, now." But Ada had spent too many years following orders. "We go together or not at all." The door shook as someone applied a key. Caleb positioned himself, rifle ready. Ada drew her Colt, praying she wouldn't have to use it. The door burst open. The guard Thompson, presumably, stood silhouetted against the light. His eyes widened at the sight of them. "Don't," Caleb warned. "Thompson went for his gun anyway." Caleb moved faster, the rifle butt catching Thompson in the stomach. The guard doubled over, gasping. A second figure appeared, the other platform guard. Rifle already rising. Ada reacted without thinking. The Colt bucked in her hand, the shot going wide but close enough to make the guard dive for cover. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. "So much for quiet," Caleb grunted, dragging Thompson's unconscious form inside. "Out the back, now." They burst onto the rear platform just as shouts erupted from the passenger cars. More guards. Of course there were more guards. "Jump," Caleb commanded. The ground looked impossibly far away. Rushing past as the train began to move, the engineer, spooked by gunfire, was leaving early. Ada jumped. She hit hard, rolling like Caleb had taught her. Pain exploded through her shoulder, but she kept rolling, getting clear of the tracks. Caleb landed beside her, graceful despite his size. Gunfire erupted from the train. Bullets whined off rocks, kicked up sprays of frozen earth. They ran, zigzagging toward the prepared horses Lyle had hidden. "There," Caleb pointed to the outcropping where 2 horses waited, already saddled. They mounted quickly, Ada struggling with her injured shoulder. Behind them, guards were leaping from the slowly accelerating train, but they were already too far behind. "Ride?" Caleb spurred his horse north, away from town, away from the obvious escape routes. Ada followed, leaning low over her mount's neck as more bullets split the air. They rode hard for 10 minutes before Caleb signaled a halt in a narrow canyon. The horses were lathered, breathing hard. Ada's shoulder felt like fire. "Let me see," Caleb said, already dismounting. "We don't have time." "We don't have time for you to bleed out either." He helped her down, checking the shoulder. Fresh blood seeped through the bandages. "Torn open. We need to stop this." As he worked, rebandaging with supplies from his saddlebags, Ada laughed shakily. "So much for our brilliant plan. The documents are on the train. That's what matters. If they find them, if they don't just throw them out as suspicious additions, they'll find them." Caleb's hands were gentle but efficient. "Federal bureaucrats are nothing if not thorough. Every paper will be cataloged, examined, and when they see what we've added." "Dorn burns," Ada finished. "Eventually. Men like him have lawyers, connections, but yes, eventually he burns." A new sound reached them, hoofbeats. Many hoofbeats. Caleb finished the bandaging quickly, helped her remount. "The guards must have had horses waiting," Ada said. "Or Dorn's men circled back when they realized the fires were a diversion." Caleb swung into his saddle. "Either way, we need to move." They rode deeper into the Badlands, following paths Ada wouldn't have seen without Caleb's guidance. The landscape was brutal wind-carved rock, patches of ice, sudden drops that could lame a horse or worse. But Caleb navigated it like he'd been born to it, finding passages where none seemed to exist. Still, their pursuers were gaining. Sound carried strangely in the canyons, making it hard to tell how close, but definitely closer. There. Caleb pointed to a narrow defile between two cliff faces. Single-file passage, defensible. They pushed through, horses protesting the tight squeeze. On the other side, a box canyon, 3 walls of stone, one way in or out, a trap or a fortress, depending on perspective. "We make our stand here," Caleb said, dismounting. He pulled his rifle, checking ammunition. "They'll have to come through that passage 1 or 2 at a time. And when we run out of bullets," he gave her a look that wasn't quite a smile, "then we find out how much that fancy shooting practice paid off." They positioned themselves behind fallen rocks, good cover with clear lines of sight to the passage. The horses were secured further back, protected by an overhang. Waiting was the worst part. Ada's shoulder throbbed. Her hands were numb with cold, and somewhere out there, Finn was waiting for her to come back. "I have to ask," she said quietly. "What was Red Switch to you?" Caleb was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then my sister lived there. Mary, she was like that handkerchief. Delicate, beautiful. Didn't belong in a hard place, but she followed her husband out west anyway." Past tense, Ada's heart clenched. "I was away, scouting for the army. When I got back," he swallowed hard. "They said it was raiders, but raiders don't burn account books. Don't specifically target people who've been asking questions about land rights." Dorn. Him or men like him. The official investigation went nowhere. Witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. Evidence got lost, and I got told to let it go or find another line of work. "So you've been hunting him too." Hunting, watching, waiting for the right moment. He glanced at her. "Then you came along, stirring things up. Figured it was a sign." The first rider appeared at the passage entrance. Caleb's rifle cracked, the shot sparking off the rocks inches from the rider's head. The man yanked his horse back, cursing. "That's your only warning," Caleb shouted. "Next one doesn't miss." The response was predictable. Multiple rifles opened up, bullets peppering their cover. Ada kept her head down, waiting for a clear shot. When a figure tried to dash through the passage on foot, she fired, forcing him back. "Good shot," Caleb noted, firing again. "You might survive this yet." "Such confidence," Ada muttered, reloading. The firefight settled into a pattern. Their attackers would probe, trying to rush the passage. Caleb and Ada would drive them back. But each exchange depleted their ammunition, and the light was fading. In darkness, defenders lost most of their advantage. Then Ada heard something that made her blood freeze. Finn's voice, high and frightened. "Ada, Ada." She started to rise, but Caleb pulled her down. "Wait, could be a trick." But then Finn appeared in the passage, pushed forward by McCready. The scarred gunman had one hand twisted in the boy's collar, a pistol in the other. "Well now," McCready called out. "Looks like the game's changed. You want to see this boy grow up? You throw out those guns, now." Ada's vision went red. "If you hurt him?" "Already did," McCready said casually. And Ada saw the bruise darkening Finn's cheek. "Question is, how much more hurt he takes. Your choice, widow woman." Caleb put a hand on her arm. "Steady. He wants us alive, or he'd have shot the boy already." But Ada was already moving, standing, letting her Colt fall. "Let him go. I'll come quietly." "Ada, no!" Finn struggled against McCready's grip. "I'm sorry. I tried to follow. I wanted to help." "Shh, it's all right." Ada stepped out from cover, hands raised. "Just let him go." Both of you," McCready said. "Hart too. Boss wants words with both of you." Caleb emerged slowly, rifle laid aside. His face was stone, but Ada saw the calculation in his eyes. He was looking for an opening, any opening. They walked forward, Ada slightly ahead. 20 feet, 15, 10. She could see tears cutting through the dirt on Finn's face. At 5 feet, everything happened at once. Caleb stumbled or seemed to. As McCready's attention shifted, Ada lunged for Finn. McCready's gun swung toward her, but Caleb was already moving, a hidden knife flashing from his boot. The blade caught McCready in the gun arm. He howled, dropping the pistol. Finn twisted free, and Ada shoved him behind her. Caleb and McCready grappled, but the gunman was bigger, stronger, and not sporting a recently knifed arm. They went down hard, rolling in the dirt. Other riders were spurring through the passage now, shouting. Ada scooped up McCready's dropped pistol, firing at the entrance to slow them. "The horses!" she yelled to Finn. "Get them ready!" But it was too late. Riders poured through. Too many to stop. Caleb managed to throw McCready off, but the man rolled to his feet with surprising agility, blood streaming from his arm. They were surrounded. 6 men, guns drawn. McCready grinned through his pain. "Nice try. Hard, but the boss really wants to talk now." Ada pulled Finn close, feeling him tremble against her. They'd lost, but at least she felt the weight of the hidden document still in her coat. Not everything was lost, not yet. "All right," she said. "We'll come, but the boy—" "Oh, the boy comes too." McCready said, "Insurance. You might say, now move. Judge Dorn's waiting, and he ain't a patient man." As they were herded toward horses, Caleb caught Ada's eye. The look said, "This isn't over." No, Ada thought, feeling the documents against her ribs. It wasn't over. It had barely begun. The church bell of Ash Hollow rang out across the frozen morning, its bronze voice carrying farther than usual in the still air. Sister Eugenia pulled the rope with determination, each peal a summons that couldn't be ignored. People emerged from shops and houses, drawn by the urgency of the sound. The bell only rang like this for emergencies: fire, flood, or death. Today, it would herald something else entirely. Ada stood at the church entrance, her hands trembling not from cold but from what she was about to do. 3 days had passed since McCready had dragged them before Judge Dorn. 3 days of threats, negotiations, and careful planning. Now, everything depended on the next hour. "You're sure about this?" Caleb murmured beside her. The bruise on his jaw had turned purple-yellow, a souvenir from their captivity. "It's the only way," Ada replied, touching the documents hidden in her coat, the ones they'd kept back, the most damning evidence. "Dorn made a mistake letting us go." He had, too, after hours of interrogation, unable to find the hidden documents, certain the train evidence would be dismissed as forgery. Dorn had grown overconfident. He'd release them with a warning: leave the territory or face worse than death. He'd even returned Finn, believing a frightened boy would keep Ada compliant. He'd underestimated them all. The square filled steadily. Merchants, miners, ranch hands, even some of Dorn's own men. Curious about the commotion, Sheriff Pike appeared at the courthouse steps, hand on his gun, but uncertain. Even he wouldn't interrupt a church gathering without cause. "Enough," Sister Eugenia said, surveying the crowd. At least 100 souls, maybe more. "God's house overflows. Speak your truth, child." Ada climbed the church steps, very aware of the target she was making of herself. But Running Bear's warriors were positioned on rooftops, watching. Deputy Lyle stood near the blacksmiths, badge newly restored, ready to maintain order. They'd prepared for this. "Citizens of Ash Hollow," Ada began, her voice carrying clear across the square. "I stand before you with evidence of crimes against this community." A murmur ran through the crowd. Pike started forward, but Lyle intercepted him, a hand on his arm. speaking urgently. For years, Ada continued, we've watched our neighbors lose their lands to foreclosure. We've seen families driven out, their claims suddenly invalid. We've been told it was law, progress, the price of civilization. She pulled out the first document, holding it high. But what if I told you it was theft? What if I showed you proof that Judge Silas Dorn has been falsifying claims, forging signatures, stealing what was rightfully ours? The murmur grew louder. Someone shouted, "Prove it!" Ada began to read. Names, dates, amounts. The Hendersons' farm, seized on false tax claims while the receipts showing payment were destroyed. The Martinez family's ranch. Their Spanish grant mysteriously invalidated just as silver was discovered nearby. Transaction after transaction, each backed by documents bearing Dorn's signature or seal. The crowd's mood shifted like wind changing direction. These weren't anonymous victims, they were neighbors, friends, family. Old Sam Henderson was right there in the crowd, tears streaming down his weathered face as he heard his story confirmed. Lies. Dorn himself appeared, pushing through the crowd, his expensive coat flapping. This woman is a thief and a charlatan sheriff. Arrest her. But Pike hesitated. The crowd was pressing closer, and their faces weren't friendly. Some of Dorn's own hired men were looking uncomfortable, realizing they'd been protecting a man who'd robbed their drinking companions. I have more, Ada said, pulling out Running Bear's documents. Treaties signed by the federal government, granting land rights to the Crow Nation. And here, another paper. Orders from Judge Dorn to ignore those treaties, to survey tribal land for the railroad. Running Bear stepped forward from the crowd, dignified in his traditional dress. My people keep our own records, he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. We remember every promise broken, every acre stolen. The papers speak truth. Savage testimony isn't admissible, Dorn began, but the crowd's angry rumble cut him off. And what about my testimony? Deputy Lyle mounted the steps, his young face set with determination. I've been keeping my own records. Judge, every bribe you offered, every time you ordered me to look the other way, every family you had me help evict. He pulled out a leather journal. Names, dates, amounts, all here. Dorn's face had gone from red to pale. You gave an oath, Deputy, to uphold the law. I am upholding it, Lyle said firmly, just not your version. The crowd was pressing closer now, angry voices rising. Someone threw a clod of frozen earth that splattered against Dorn's coat. McCready and his remaining men formed a protective circle around the judge, hands on their weapons, but they were badly outnumbered. There's more, Ada had to shout now over the noise. The fire at the Whitman farm, not an accident. The cave-in at the Copper Queen mine that killed 12 men, safety reports were ignored on Dorn's orders. The disappearance of Tom Bradley when he tried to file a complaint with federal authorities. Enough, Dorn roared. Sheriff, I order you to disperse this mob. Pike looked at the crowd, at his boss, at the documents Ada was still holding. Then, slowly, he unpinned his badge and let it fall into the muddy snow. I don't work for you anymore. Judge. The explosion of noise was deafening. People surged forward, held back only by Sister Eugenia's raised hands and commanding presence. Peace, she called. We are civilized people. We handle this by law. What law? Someone shouted. Dorn owns the law. Not all of it, a new voice said. The crowd parted for a man in a black suit, travel dusty but official looking. He climbed the steps with measured dignity, producing a leather wallet that he flipped open to show a badge. Marcus Webb, Deputy U.M. Marshal, he announced. I received some interesting documents on a train from Cotton Rift, followed by a telegraph from concerned citizens. I believe I need to have a conversation with Judge Dorn. Dorn tried to bluster. This is my jurisdiction. Marshal, these are local matters. Treaty violations are federal matters. Webb said mildly, as is mail fraud, which is what falsifying government documents amounts to. And from what I'm hearing, there's considerable more. Ada felt her knees go weak with relief. The gamble had paid off. The documents on the train had reached the right hands after all. But Dorn wasn't finished. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Ada with naked hatred. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed. "Years of work, progress for this territory." "You mean years of theft," Caleb said, stepping up beside Ada. "Years of families broken, lives ruined, like the families at Red Switch." Dorn went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "No." Caleb pulled out one final document, this one from his own code. "Funny, because your signature is on the order. Clear the settlement by any means necessary. Railway survey must proceed." Dated 1 week before the massacre. The crowd had gone dead silent. Everyone knew about Red Switch. The horror of it was carved into the territory's memory. "You can't prove," Dorn began. "Mary Hart was my sister," Caleb said quietly. "She wrote letters, kept copies of every threat, every visit from men claiming to represent the railroad, all dated, all describing pressure to sell or face consequences." His voice hardened. "She was 23 years old. Her daughter was 4. They burned alive in their home." Someone in the crowd cursed. Another woman began to weep. The anger was shifting, deepening into something more dangerous. "Marshal," Sister Eugenia said urgently, "perhaps Judge Dorn should be taken into protective custody, for his own safety." Webb nodded, already gesturing to men he'd positioned around the square more federal deputies. Ada realized. They closed in on Dorn with professional efficiency. "This isn't over," Dorn shouted as they cuffed him. "I have friends lawyers. You think one marshal and some stolen papers can bring me down?" "No," Ada said quietly. "But 100 witnesses can, 1,000 pages of evidence can, the truth can." They took him away, McCready and his surviving men being rounded up as well. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, in small groups, talking excitedly. The spell was broken. The fear that had gripped Ash Hollow for years was lifting like morning fog. But there was a price for victory. That night, as Ada helped Sister Eugenia tend to those injured in the day's scuffles, they received word. The grain warehouse had been set ablaze, Dorn's final order to his remaining loyalists. Half the town's food stores for winter. Gone. "He'll answer for it," Marshal Webb assured them. "Add arson to the charges." But that didn't fill empty bellies. Ada looked at Finn, thinner than he should be, and felt the weight of unintended consequences. In exposing Dorn, had she doomed the very people she'd tried to save? "We'll manage," Sister Eugenia said firmly, reading her expression. "We've survived worse, and now, at least, we'll survive as free people." Running Bear's people came forward first, sharing their preserved foods, their knowledge of winter foraging. Then neighboring ranchers, those who'd kept their lands, offering what they could spare. The community Dorn had tried to divide was pulling together. "It's not enough," Caleb said quietly to Ada as they watched wagons of supplies arriving. "But it's a start. The federal government will have to make reparations," she replied. "Return the stolen lands. Compensate the victims. Marshal Webb said there are procedures." "Procedures take time. Winter doesn't wait." He was right. Ada touched the document still in her coat, copies of everything, carefully preserved. "Then we make sure the procedures happen fast. We don't let them forget or delay. We push until justice is done." Caleb studied her with those gray eyes. "You've changed. When I first met you, you were running. Now you're standing and fighting." "I had good teachers," she said, meaning him, meaning all of them. "And I had something worth fighting for." Finn ran up then, excited despite the late hour. "Ada, mister, Morrison from the general store says he'll honor our old account, and Mrs. Baker wants to know if you'll help with the school." Now that you're staying. Staying? The word hit her unexpectedly. Somewhere in all this, the plan to flee had transformed into a plan to remain, to rebuild. Tell Mrs. Baker, yes, she said. We're staying. Finn whooped and ran off to spread the news. Caleb watched him go with something like fondness. Boy's got spirit, he observed. Too much, sometimes. Ada hesitated, then asked what she'd been wondering. What about you? Will you stay? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Been drifting since Red Switch, he finally said. Looking for answers, for justice, he shrugged. Maybe it's time to stop drifting. Ash Hollow could use men like you, especially now. Maybe. He looked at her then. Something unguarded in his expression. Or maybe I've got other reasons to stay. Before Ada could respond, Sister Eugenia called for help with another patient. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. Something that had nothing to do with justice or survival, and everything to do with two damaged people finding something worth building together. Outside, snow began to fall again, but this time it felt different. Not a threat, but a blanket, covering the old hurts, preparing the ground for new growth come spring. The battle for Ash Hollow was won, but the fight for its future and their own was just beginning. The smell of smoke reached them before they saw the flames. Ada's horse shied nervously, and she had to grip the reins tight to keep control. Beside her, Caleb was already scanning the horizon, his face grim in the orange glow that lit the evening sky. Forest fire, he said tersely. Winds pushing it through Devil's Canyon, where they'd hidden Finn, where Sheriff Pike was holding him in that abandoned line shack, using the boy as bait to draw Ada out. They'd taken him 3 hours ago, right from Sister Eugenia's mission while Ada was testifying to Marshal Webb. The message had been clear: come alone. Bring all remaining evidence, or the boy pays the price. We have to get to him, Ada said, already spurring her horse forward. Wait! Caleb caught her reins. Think, Pike knows that terrain like his own hand. He's counting on you charging in blind. I don't care about his trap. Finn's in there. And you won't help him by getting yourself killed? Caleb studied the fire's movement with practiced eyes. It's moving fast but predictable, following the canyon walls, feeding on the dry underbrush. If we circle west, come down through Widow's Creek. He was right, and Ada hated it. Every instinct screamed at her to charge straight in, but that would only get them all killed. She forced herself to breathe, to think past the terror clawing at her throat. The creek bed, she said, remembering. It's mostly dry, but there are pools, deep ones, fed by springs, and wet sand between them. Natural fire break. Caleb was already turning his horse. We soak blankets in the pools, use them as shields, move fast between safe spots. They rode hard, the fire's roar growing louder with each mile. The heat hit them like a physical wall when they reached the canyon's western entrance. Smoke rolled out in thick billows, turning the setting sun into a bloody eye. At the first pool, they dismounted. Caleb immediately began soaking blankets, while Ada tore strips from her petticoat to tie around the horse's eyes. They won't go in there, she said. They will if they trust us. Caleb handed her a dripping blanket. Wrap this around yourself. Keep it wet. When we move fast. No stopping, no matter what you see or hear. Ada nodded, though her hands shook as she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. The wet wool was heavy, cold despite the heat radiating from the canyon walls. They led the horses into hell. The first stretch was the worst. Fire crowned in the trees above them, sending down showers of burning branches. Ada kept her head down, focusing on Caleb's back, trusting him to find the path. The wet blanket steamed, offering blessed protection from the worst of the heat. At the second pool, they re-soaked everything. Ada's lungs burned from smoke despite the damp cloth she held over her face, but they were making progress. The line shack should be just around the next bend. Listen, Caleb said suddenly. Through the fire's voice came another sound shouting. Men's voices raised in panic. Then, cutting through it all, a boy's scream. "Finn!" Ada lunged forward, but Caleb caught her. "Smart, not fast," he reminded her. "The fire's creating its own wind. It'll shift directions, create pockets of safety and death. Watch the smoke." They rounded the bend to find chaos. The line shack was still standing, but fire surrounded it on 3 sides. Pike and 2 of his remaining men were trying to control panicked horses. And there, tied to the shack's porch post, was Finn. The boy was struggling against his bonds, coughing in the smoke. Alive, thank God, alive. Pike spotted them through the smoke. His face was wild with fear. All authority stripped away by the primal terror of fire. "Whitlow!" he screamed. "Get us out of here!" "Let the boy go!" Ada shouted back. "The papers first, all of them." Ada looked at Caleb. He shook his head slightly. They didn't have the papers anyway. Marshal Webb had them all now, safe in federal custody. But Pike didn't know that. "I'll make you a deal," Ada called out. "Safe passage out for all of us, including you. You think I'm stupid soon as we're clear, you'll—" His words were cut off as a massive pine tree. Its trunk burned through, came crashing down. It missed the shack by feet, sending up a shower of sparks that set new fires everywhere they landed. One of Pike's men panicked, spurring his horse straight into the fire. His screams were mercifully brief. The other man threw down his gun and ran on foot toward the creek. "Decide fast, Pike," Caleb shouted. "That shack's got maybe 5 minutes before the roof catches." Pike looked at the fire, at Finn, at the gun in his hand. Then he did something that surprised them all. He cut the boy's bonds. "Get him out," he said, defeated. "Just get us all out." Finn stumbled forward, and Ada was there to catch him, wrapping him in her wet blanket. His face was soot-stained, his wrists raw from the rope, but he was whole. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "I tried to fight." "Shh, you did fine. Can you ride?" He nodded, though she could feel him trembling. Caleb was already organizing their escape, his military training taking over. "Single file. Stay in the creek bed. Pike, you're in the middle where I can watch you. Anyone breaks formation, they're on their own." They moved as a unit, a strange alliance born of necessity. The fire pushed them, herded them like cattle through the narrow, safe passage. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses through sections where the creek narrowed to nothing. Once, a burning tree fell directly across their path, and they had to backtrack, losing precious time. Ada kept Finn in front of her, ready to shield him with her own body if necessary. The boy was bearing up well, better than Pike, who whimpered every time sparks showered down on them. "There," Caleb pointed ahead to where the canyon widened. "Open ground past those rocks. We can make it." They spurred the exhausted horses to one last effort. The fire was literally at their heels now, jumping from tree to tree with terrifying speed. Ada felt her blanket beginning to smolder, the protection failing. Then they were through, bursting out onto open grassland where the fire couldn't follow without wind to drive it. They didn't stop until they'd put a good half-mile between them and the inferno. Pike collapsed from his horse, retching into the grass. Ada ignored him, focused on checking Finn for injuries, some burns on his arms, smoke inhalation, but nothing life-threatening. The boy was tougher than he looked. "You came for me," Finn said wonderingly. "Through all that." "Of course we did." Ada hugged him fiercely. "You're my brother. We don't leave family behind." Caleb cleared his throat. "Touching as this is, we still have a problem." He nodded at Pike, who was watching them with hollow eyes. "What do we do with him?" "By all rights, they should take him to Marshal Webb. Let federal justice deal with a sheriff who'd kidnapped a child, who'd served corruption for so long. It would be easy. It would be justified." Ada looked at Pike, really looked at him. He was just a man. scared and broken, all his power stripped away. The fire had burned away more than trees. It had burned away pretense, leaving only the bare truth of what they all were, fragile humans trying to survive. "You're done," she told Pike. "Done being sheriff, done working for men like Dorn. You leave this territory and never come back. That's the deal." "Oh, Ida," Caleb warned. "He kidnapped Finn, held him as hostage. And he cut him free when it mattered." Ada kept her eyes on Pike. "One chance. That's all you get. Waste it. And Marshal Webb hears everything." Pike nodded frantically. "I'll go. Tonight, I swear." "Then go." The former sheriff stumbled to his horse, mounted clumsily, and rode off without looking back. Caleb watched him go with disapproval. "You're too soft," he said. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of all the hardness." Ada looked back at the canyon, where smoke still rose in a black column. "The fire doesn't care about justice or revenge. It just consumes everything. I don't want to be like that." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your choice, but if he comes back..." "He won't." Ada was certain of that. She'd seen the look in Pike's eyes. The man who rode away wasn't the same one who'd served Dorn so faithfully. The fire had changed them all. They camped that night near a clean stream, far from the smoke. Finn fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by his ordeal. Ada sat by the small campfire, watching the flames dance. Such a different fire from the one they'd fled. This one gave warmth, comfort, life. "You did well today," Caleb said, sitting beside her. "Kept your head, made hard choices. Not everyone could have done that." "I was terrified every second." "But you didn't let it stop you. That's what courage is." Ada looked at him, this scarred man who'd become so essential to their survival. "What happens now? Dorn's in custody. Pike's gone. The evidence is with the Federals. It feels like an ending." "Or a beginning." Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, sending up sparks. "Ash Hollow needs rebuilding, needs good people to step up, fill the void left by Dorn's crowd. People like us." "Maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "I got a letter yesterday. From Running Bear." Ada waited, sensing this was important. "His people are willing to negotiate new treaties. Fair ones, this time. But they want people they trust on the other side of the table. He mentioned you specifically." "Me, I don't know anything about treaties." "You know about fairness, about standing up for what's right even when it costs you. That's rarer than you think." Ada considered this. A month ago, she'd been a widow trying to hold on to a piece of land. Now people were looking to her for leadership, for hope. The responsibility was daunting. "I'll need help," she said finally. "You'll have it." Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness. "If you want it." She turned their joined hands over, studying the contrasts. His scarred and calloused from years of hard use. Hers bearing the marks of her own struggles. Together, they made something stronger than either alone. "Yes," she said simply. "I want it." They sat together as the fire burned low, planning a future neither had dared imagine. Behind them, Finn slept peacefully, safe and whole. Above them, stars emerged as the smoke cleared, bright with promise. The fire had tested them, scarred them, but not broken them. Like the forest itself, they would grow back stronger, rooted in soil enriched by ash and watered by hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. The old world had burned. Now it was time to build the new. Rain drummed steadily on the wooden roof of the abandoned cabin. A rhythmic sound that should have been soothing but only heightened the tension in the small space. Tomorrow, they would ride into Clearwater to deliver the final evidence to the federal authorities. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in this pause between battle and resolution, something else needed settling. Ada stood by the single window, watching lightning illuminate the distant mountains. Her shoulder had healed to a dull ache, and the various cuts and bruises from their flight through the fire had faded to memory. But other wounds, deeper ones, remained raw. "You should rest," Caleb said from across the room. He was cleaning his rifle by lamplight, movements automatic after years of practice. "Long ride tomorrow." "I can't." She turned from the window, studying him in the golden light. "Too much spinning in my mind." "The plan's solid. Webb will meet us at the courthouse. Running Bear's bringing his witnesses. Lyle has the rest of the documents. It'll work." "That's not what I'm thinking about." Caleb's hand stilled on the rifle. The rain continued its percussion, filling the silence between them. They'd danced around this for days now. The growing connection that had nothing to do with justice or survival and everything to do with two scarred hearts recognizing each other. "Ada," he began, then stopped, setting the rifle aside carefully. "Don't." She moved closer, drawn by something stronger than caution. "Don't tell me all the reasons this is complicated. I know them. I've listed them to myself 100 times. Then you know. I know that tomorrow isn't promised. I know that we've both lost too much to take anything for granted." She was close enough now to see the storm in his gray eyes. "I know that I'm tired of being careful, of living like I'm already dead." "You don't understand," Caleb said roughly. "The things I've done, the man I was, were past tense." Ada reached up, her fingers barely grazing the scar on his throat. He went very still, like a wild animal deciding whether to flee or trust. "We're not those people anymore. The fire burned them away, left us clean." Ada, her name was almost a prayer on his lips. "I don't know how to be gentle anymore. The war, Red Switch, all the years between, they've made me hard. Then let me teach you softness again." She took his scarred hands in hers, marveling at how carefully he held her, as if she might break. "Let me show you that strength doesn't always mean standing alone." The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. But inside, the storm was quieter, deeper, two people standing at the edge of possibility. "I'm frightened," Ada admitted, the words coming hard. "Not of Dorn or his men, not even of dying. I'm frightened of feeling again, of opening my heart just to have it shattered." "You think I'm not?" Caleb's voice was raw. "You think I don't lie awake wondering if I even remember how to love someone proper, if there's enough left of me that's worth giving?" Ada moved closer still, until she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the leather and gunpowder that clung to his clothes. "There's enough," she said firmly. "More than enough." She rose on her toes, bringing her face level with his. "I'm not asking for promises of forever. I'm not even asking for words. I'm just asking for tonight, for honesty, for two people choosing each other in spite of all the reasons not to." Caleb's control finally broke. His hands came up to frame her face, impossibly gentle for all their strength. "You sure?" he asked, and she could hear years of loneliness in those two words. "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the desperate passion of youth. This was deeper, more complex recognition and promise. Sorrow and hope all mingled together. Ada felt herself coming alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Nerve endings singing with awareness. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, she took his hand and led him to the simple bed in the corner. The rain had intensified, beating against the windows like urgent fingers. But inside their small shelter, time seemed to slow. "Wait," Caleb said, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ada thought he would pull away. Instead, he reached for something in his pack, the embroidered handkerchief he'd given her that first night, now clean and carefully preserved. "This was Mary's," he said quietly. "My sister. She made it for her wedding, said it would bring luck and happiness." His fingers traced the delicate stitching. "I've carried it all these years, unable to let go. But maybe Maybe it's time for it to bring happiness again. Ada took the handkerchief with trembling hands, understanding the magnitude of the gesture. This wasn't just fabric and thread. It was trust, was letting go of the past to make room for the future. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "She must have been very skilled." "She would have liked you. I think you have the same strength, the same refusal to let the world break you." Ada set the handkerchief carefully on the nightstand, then turned back to him. "Show me," she said softly. "Show me how to help you heal. Show me how we can be whole together." What followed was a careful exploration, a gradual lowering of defenses built over years of pain. Caleb's hands shook as he helped her with the buttons of her dress, and Ada saw vulnerability in his eyes that the toughest gunfight had never revealed. "You're sure?" he asked again as she stood before him in her shift, lamplight painting her skin gold. Instead of answering with words, Ada reached for the ties of her undergarment. But as her hands moved to the hem, she paused, meeting his eyes with fierce intention. "Pull my skirt higher." She commanded not a plea but a claim, a declaration that she was choosing this, choosing him. His hands obeyed, burning with a hunger too wild to tame, yet tempered by reverence. The fabric whispered against her skin as he lifted it slowly, his touch careful, worshipful. But when she placed her hand over his, he stopped immediately, reading the boundary in her touch. "Only this far," she whispered. "Only what we both choose." "Only what we both choose," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion and restraint. They came together like two halves of something broken made whole, careful of each other's scars, both seen and unseen. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm within, wild and necessary, washing away the dust of old pain. Later, they lay entwined beneath the rough blankets, listening to the rain's diminishing song. Ada traced patterns on Caleb's chest, marveling at the solid reality of him. This man who'd appeared in her darkest hour like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. "What happens after tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "After we deliver the evidence. After we win, because we will win, won't we?" Caleb's arm tightened around her. "We'll win. Dorn's finished. And those documents will ensure it. The question is what kind of life we build from the ashes." "Together," the word hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. "If you'll have me, I'm not an easy man. Ada, I've got shadows that may never fully lift, nights when the memories come calling. I can't promise—" She silenced him with a kiss. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for partnership. For someone to stand beside me as we figure out what comes next. That I can do." He caught her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. "Been alone so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone to protect, someone to build with. You've reminded me." "We've reminded each other," Ada corrected, "of what it means to be alive instead of just surviving." They talked long into the night, making plans both practical and dreamy. The ranch Ada would reclaim and transform, the horse breeding program Caleb had always wanted to try. A real school for Ash Hollow, where children like Finn could learn without fear. Justice work with Running Bear's people, ensuring the new treaties were fair and honored. "And us?" Ada asked as dawn began to gray the windows. "What about us?" Caleb turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "I'm not good with pretty words, Ada, but I know this you've become essential to me. Like air or water, I don't want to imagine a future that doesn't have you in it." "Then don't," she said simply. "Imagine one with me instead." They rose as the sun broke through the dissipating clouds, dressing in companionable silence. But everything had changed. Every glance held new meaning. Every casual touch sparked awareness. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and neither wanted to. As Caleb saddled the horses, Ada picked up Mary's handkerchief, running her fingers over the intricate embroidery. All those tiny stitches, each one an act of hope for a future that had been cut short. But the hope itself survived, passed down, renewed. "Ready?" Caleb asked, leading her horse over. Ada tucked the handkerchief close to her heart, then swung into the saddle. "Ready!" They rode toward Clearwater side by side, toward justice and whatever lay beyond. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Puddles reflected the sky like scattered mirrors, showing glimpses of infinite possibility. Behind them, the cabin stood empty but somehow less abandoned. Within its walls, two people had found each other, had chosen hope over fear, connection over isolation. The rain had blessed their union, and now the sun would light their way forward. Tomorrow would bring challenges, court proceedings, the dismantling of Dorne's empire, the slow work of rebuilding trust and communities. But they would face it together, no longer alone, no longer defined by their losses but by what they'd found in each other. The road stretched ahead, muddy but passable, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, it felt like it was leading somewhere worth going. The courthouse square in Clearwater filled steadily as word spread through the town like wildfire. By noon, it seemed half the territory had gathered, drawn by the promise of justice long denied. Ada stood on the courthouse steps, the leather portfolio heavy in her hands, watching the crowd grow. "Bigger turnout than expected," Marshal Webb murmured beside her. The federal lawman had brought a full complement of deputies, their badges glinting in the harsh noon sun. "Word travels fast when a judge falls." Behind them, through the courthouse windows, Ada could see Dorne seated at the defendant's table. Even now, stripped of his power, he maintained an air of arrogance that made her blood burn. His expensive lawyers flanked him, whispering urgently. "He still thinks he'll walk free," she said. "Let him think it," Webb replied. "Makes the fall harder." Sister Eugenia emerged from the crowd, leading a group of witnesses, farmers, ranchers, miners, all clutching their own documents. The nun had spent days gathering testimonies, and the results were overwhelming. Behind her, Running Bear walked with quiet dignity, his warriors forming a protective circle around the elderly Crow women who would testify about treaty violations. Ada Finn pushed through the crowd, Caleb close behind him. The boy's face was bright with excitement. "Deputy Lyle's here. He brought 3 more boxes of evidence from Dorne's own office." Sure enough, Lyle was directing men to carry boxes up the courthouse steps. The young deputy had proven invaluable, his insider knowledge revealing hidden caches of incriminating documents. He caught Ada's eye and nodded, a gesture of respect between equals. "Time to go in," Webb said. "Judge Cornelius is ready to begin." The territorial judge had been brought in from Helena, one of the few clean judges left. Webb had assured them. As they filed into the packed courthouse, Ada felt the weight of expectation from the crowd. This wasn't just about her land anymore. This was about every family Dorne had destroyed, every life he'd ruined in his climb to power. The courtroom was standing room only. Ada took her place at the witness table, Caleb beside her as her chosen advocate. Across the room, Dorne's lead lawyer, a snake named Pemberton from San Francisco, was already on his feet. "Your Honor," Pemberton began smoothly, "I move for dismissal. This entire proceeding is based on stolen documents, obtained through criminal acts." "Motion denied," Judge Cornelius said flatly. "The federal marshal has already validated the evidence chain. Proceed." Marshal Webb. What followed was a systematic destruction of Dorne's empire. Webb called witness after witness, each adding another stone to the mountain of evidence. Ada testified first, her voice clear and steady as she detailed the false auction, the forged documents, the threats and intimidation. "Mrs. Whitlow," Pemberton cross-examined. "Isn't it true you harbored a personal vendetta against Judge Dorne after your husband's death?" "My husband died of lung fever," Ada replied calmly. What I harbor is a desire for justice for my family and every other family he's wronged. The documents were entered into evidence one by one: forged deeds, falsified tax records, orders to surveyors to ignore treaty boundaries. Each paper was another nail in Dorn's coffin, and the crowd murmured angrily with each revelation. But it was when Sister Eugenia took the stand that the atmosphere shifted from anger to horror. "I've been keeping records at the mission," she said, producing a leather journal. "Deaths that seemed suspicious, disappearances, fires that happened too conveniently." She began to read names and dates, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. The Hendricks family burned out 2 days after refusing to sell. The Olsen brothers found at the bottom of Bright Angel Canyon after filing a complaint. Sarah Morrison vanished on her way to the federal marshal's office with evidence. The list went on. 20 names, 30. By the time she finished, women were weeping openly in the gallery, and men's faces were dark with rage. "Lies!" Dorn burst out, unable to contain himself. "Coincidences twisted by a hysterical nun." "Then perhaps," Judge Cornelius said coldly, "you can explain this?" He held up a document, one from the train robbery, bearing Dorn's seal. "An order to permanently silence one Thomas Bradley, dated 3 days before his disappearance. Your seal, is it not?" Dorn's lawyers tried to object, but the damage was done. More documents followed, each more damning than the last. Orders to Pike to ignore crimes, payments to the Copperwolves for special services, the entire ledger detailing bribes to territorial officials. Then Running Bear took the stand. The old warrior spoke slowly, carefully, in accented but clear English. He told of treaties signed in good faith, of promises broken, of land stolen acre by acre. He produced the original treaty documents, comparing them to the forgeries in Dorn's files. "My people kept the true papers," he said with quiet dignity. "We knew someday someone would listen. Today is that day." But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. Sheriff Pike, brought in chains from the territorial prison where he'd been caught trying to flee, had decided to turn state's evidence. "I did terrible things," he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. "On Dorn's orders, but Red Switch, that was supposed to be just intimidation. Make them sell and leave. But Dorn wanted more. He wanted an example." The courthouse went dead silent. "He gave the order himself. Burn it all. Leave no witnesses. Make it look like raiders." Pike's voice broke. 23 people, women, children, all because they wouldn't sell to the railroad. Caleb's hand found Ada's under the table, gripping tight. She could feel the tremor running through him, the effort it took not to launch himself at Dorn right there in the courtroom. "That's enough," Judge Cornelius said when Pike finished. "I've heard enough. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury." But he never finished the sentence. Dorn, seeing his fate sealed, made one last desperate play. He lunged across the table, grabbing for Pemberton's hidden derringer. The courtroom erupted in chaos as people dove for cover. The gun swung toward Ada, of course it did. Even now, Dorn blamed her for his downfall. Time seemed to slow as Ada saw the barrel align with her heart, saw Dorn's finger tighten on the trigger. 2 things happened simultaneously. Caleb moved, throwing himself between Ada and the gun with no hesitation, no thought for his own safety. And Deputy Lyle, young and idealistic Deputy Lyle, drew and fired in one smooth motion. The derringer clattered to the floor, unfired. Dorn clutched his hand, blood seeping between his fingers where Lyle's bullet had struck. He sank back into his chair, all fight gone, looking suddenly old and pathetic. "Anyone else?" Lyle asked mildly, his gun still drawn. "No good?" Judge Cornelius banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "I think we've seen enough. Bailiff, remove the defendant. This court will reconvene in 1 hour for sentencing." The crowd filed out slowly, buzzing with excitement and relief. In the hallway, Ada found herself surrounded by well-wishers, people whose lives would be changed by today's verdict. Mrs. Henderson, tears streaming, clutched Ada's hands. "We can go home," she whispered. "My boys can see their father's grave again." One by one they came, each with their own story of loss and hope for restoration. Ada accepted their thanks graciously, but her eyes kept finding Caleb, who stood apart, watching her with an unreadable expression. When they reconvened, Judge Cornelius wasted no time. "Silas Dorn, this court finds you guilty on all charges: fraud, conspiracy, theft, corruption, and murder." He paused, letting the weight of that last word settle. "For the massacre at Red Switch alone, I sentence you to hang. Sentenced to be carried out at the territorial prison within 30 days. Dorn didn't react. He seemed to have shrunk into himself, all his power stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell. As the marshals let him out, he looked back once at Ada. "You've destroyed everything," he said. "Progress, civilization, the future." "No," Ada replied steadily. "We've destroyed corruption, we've saved civilization, and now we can build a real future." They took him away. Outside, the celebration was already beginning. Music spilled from the saloons, and people danced in the streets. Justice, so long denied, tasted sweet indeed. But Ada found herself seeking quiet, walking with Caleb to the small park behind the courthouse. They sat on a bench, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You would have taken that bullet for me," she said quietly, without thinking twice. "Why?" He turned to her, and she saw everything in his eyes: love, dedication, a promise of protection that went beyond words. "You know why. Say it anyway." "Because you're my world now, Ada Whitlow. My reason for believing the future can be better than the past. I'd take 100 bullets before I'd see you hurt." Ada leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "No bullets," she said firmly. "We've had enough of violence. From now on, we build, we heal, we live. Together." Together. As darkness fell, the celebrations continued around them. Bonfires were lit, not the destructive flames they'd fled from, but warm, welcoming fires that drew communities together. Running Bears people joined the townspeople, sharing food and stories. Sister Eugenia moved through the crowd, blessing the reconciliation. "Look," Finn said, running up to them. "Deputy Lyle gave me his badge, said I could be an honorary deputy." Ada smiled at her brother's excitement. "Just honorary? You hear you've got school to finish first." "Yes, ma'am," Finn said, but his grin didn't dim. Later, as they prepared to leave, Marshal Webb approached them. "You two did something remarkable here," he said. "Took down a corruption ring that went all the way to Washington. There'll be more trials, more men like Dorn to face justice." "Will you need us to testify again?" Ada asked. "Probably, but that's tomorrow's worry. Tonight, celebrate. You've earned it." As they rode back toward Ash Hollow, Ada reflected on how much had changed. A month ago, she'd been a desperate widow about to lose everything. Now, she was a woman who'd helped topple a corrupt empire, who'd found love in the most unlikely place, who had a future stretching bright before her. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, reading her mood as he so often did. "None," Ada said firmly. "Not one." The stars wheeled overhead, bearing witness to their triumph. Justice had been served, the future secured. And in the darkness between the stars, the spirits of Red Switch finally found peace, their deaths avenged not through violence, but through the patient, implacable force of truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: land to reclaim, communities to rebuild, lives to reshape. But tonight, riding through the darkness with the man she loved, her brother safe, her enemies vanquished, Ada Whitlow allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. 6 months after Judge Dorn's execution, spring came early to Montana Territory. The snow melted in rushing torrents, revealing ground that seemed eager to bloom. Ada stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt Whitlow Ranch house, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "Coffee's ready," Caleb called from inside. She smiled, still not quite used to the domesticity of it all. They'd been married 3 months now. A simple ceremony at Sister Eugenia's mission with half the territory in attendance. The ranch house, rebuilt with help from neighbors who no longer feared Dorn's retribution, was modest but solid, filled with hope instead of memories. "The new foals are looking strong," Caleb said, joining her on the porch with 2 steaming mugs. "That bloodline from Running Bear's people is going to make all the difference." Their horse ranch was already gaining a reputation, not just for quality animals, but as a place of healing. Veterans from both sides of the war came to work with the horses, finding peace in the simple rhythm of care and training. Some stayed on as hands, others moved on, carrying a bit of that peace with them. "Letter from the federal office," Ada said, holding up the envelope that had arrived yesterday. "They've approved funding for the school." It was her project, born from watching Finn and other children struggle with limited education. A real school for Ash Hollow, with proper teachers and books, open to all children regardless of background. Running Bear had already promised that Crow children would attend, a bridging of communities that would have been impossible under Dorn's rule. Speaking of school, Caleb nodded toward the road, where Finn was racing on his pony, books bouncing in his saddlebags. "He's going to be late again." "Let him run," Ada said fondly. "He's young. There's time enough for punctuality when he's older." Finn had thrived in the months since Dorn's fall. The scared boy who'd hidden in a mission was becoming a confident young man, splitting his time between studies and learning horsemanship from Caleb. He talked about attending university back east someday, maybe becoming a lawyer like the ones who'd helped prosecute Dorn. "Riders coming," Caleb observed, shading his eyes. "Looks like Lyle." Sure enough, Deputy Lyle, now Sheriff Lyle, duly elected by grateful citizens, was approaching with another rider. As they drew closer, Ada recognized U.S. Marshal Webb. "Morning, folks," Lyle said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to disturb your breakfast." "No disturbance," Ada assured him. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some." They dismounted, and Webb's expression told Ada this wasn't a social call. "We've had word from Washington," he said without preamble. "The investigation has expanded. Dorn wasn't working alone. There's a whole network of corrupt judges and railroad officials. We need your testimony again." Ada felt Caleb tense beside her, protective instincts flaring, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. "Of course. When?" "There's a grand jury convening in Denver next month. We'd need you both there for at least a week, maybe 2. "We'll be there," Caleb said firmly. "Finish what we started." Webb relaxed visibly. "I hoped you'd say that. Your testimony was crucial before. It'll be crucial again. We're cleaning house from here to Washington, and it all started with you folks standing up to Dorn." After they left, Ada and Caleb walked down to the horse pastures. The spring grass was coming in green and thick, and the horses grazed contentedly. Among them was a particular mare, silver gray with a black mane, who trotted over at Ada's whistle. "She's ready," Caleb said, running his hands over the mare's legs. "Strong enough for the journey." They'd been planning this for months, a trip to Idaho Territory to look at expansion land, not to leave Ash Hollow, but to extend their operation, create a network of healing ranches across the West. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but then, so had been taking down Judge Dorn. After Denver, Ada decided, "We'll testify, then head north. New beginnings." "Sounds like we'll be traveling most of the summer." "Together," Ada reminded him. "That's what matters." That afternoon, they rode into Ash Hollow for supplies. The town was almost unrecognizable from the fearful place it had been under Dorn's rule. New businesses had opened, including a newspaper that actually printed the truth. The burnt warehouse had been rebuilt as a community center, where Sister Eugenia ran programs for anyone in need. Mrs. Hart. Mrs. Henderson called from her husband's restored general store. "Wait till you see what came on the stage." She produced a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book freshly printed, its leather binding still smelling of the workshop. Testimony of Truth, The Fall of the Dorn Empire by Margaret Patterson, one of the journalists who'd covered the trial. Ada flipped through it, seeing their names, their story, transformed into history. It was surreal, seeing their struggles reduced to chapters and paragraphs. But if it helped to prevent future Dorns, it was worth it. "There's a whole chapter about you, Mrs. Henderson said proudly. "About how you started it all, standing up at that auction." "It wasn't just me," Ada protested. "It was all of us, the whole community." But she bought several copies anyway, thinking of Finn reading it someday to his own children, understanding the price of justice and the power of ordinary people to change their world. That evening, they hosted dinner for their extended family of choice. Sister Eugenia came, bringing news from her network of missions. Running Bear attended with his grandson, who was learning English and teaching Crow to the other children in return. Deputy Sheriff Lyle brought his new bride, a schoolteacher from Denver who'd come to visit and decided to stay. They ate outside, under stars that seemed especially bright. The talk was of futures, not past's expansion plans. The new school, treaty negotiations that were actually being honored. It was the conversation of people who'd learned they could shape their own destinies. "I have an announcement," Sister Eugenia said as dessert was served. "I've been offered a position with the Federal Indian Affairs Office as an advocate for fair treatment and treaty enforcement." The table erupted in congratulations. It was perfect. Who better to ensure justice than someone who'd spent years documenting injustice? "And I've got news too," Lyle added. "The territorial governor's creating a new position, Inspector of County Records, making sure what Dorn did can't happen again. They've asked me to consider it." More congratulations, more toasts. Ada looked around the table at these people who'd become family, who'd risked everything for justice and found something greater in the process. "To the future," she said, raising her glass. "To building something better on the ashes of the old." "To the future," they echoed. Later, as guests departed and quiet settled over the ranch, Ada and Caleb sat on their porch, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not a threat but a reminder that wildness still existed, would always exist alongside civilization's attempts to tame it. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked, echoing his question from that night in Clearwater. Ada considered. The fight had cost them all so much. Friends lost, innocence shattered, scars that would never fully fade. But from that destruction had come something new and strong and infinitely precious. "No," she said finally. "No regrets, just gratitude." "For what?" "For you, for Finn, for all of them." She gestured toward the lights of town, where their friends were returning to their own homes and hopes. "For the chance to matter, to make a difference. For learning that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stand together." Caleb pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their land. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the trip to Denver, testimony that would relive painful memories, the ongoing work of building something lasting and good. But tonight, they were home. The land was theirs, legally and morally. The horses grazed peacefully in pastures that would never again be stolen by false documents. And in the house behind them, Finn slept safely, dreaming perhaps of the university education now within reach. The West was changing, slowly and sometimes painfully, from a place where might made right to one where law and justice could prevail. Ada and Caleb Hart were part of that change, would continue to be part of it for years to come. Their love had been forged in fire and struggle, tested by loss and triumph. Now it would be sustained by the quieter courage of daily life, of building instead of fighting, of choosing hope over fear each new dawn. As they finally rose to go inside, Ada paused for one last look at the star-filled sky. Somewhere up there, she liked to think, Henry was watching, proud of what she'd become. And Mary Hart, too, whose delicate handkerchief had begun it all. Now framed and hanging in their parlor a reminder that beauty and strength could coexist, that gentleness and justice were not opposites, but partners. "Coming to bed?" Caleb asked from the doorway. "Coming," she said, taking his offered hand. They went inside together, to their shared life, their earned peace, their continuing purpose. Behind them, the door closed on the past. Ahead, through windows that faced east, the promise of dawn was already gathering, patient and inevitable as justice itself. The story of Ada Whitlow and Caleb Hart was complete in one sense, but in another, it was just beginning. For lives fully lived are never really finished. They continue in the changes they create, the love they nurture, the justice they secure for those who come after. And in the Montana Territory, in a time of transformation, two souls who'd found each other in darkness continued to walk together toward the light, proof that even in the hardest ground, with courage and care, love could take root and flourish. The end was just another beginning, and the beginning was beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about Ada and Caleb's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love, justice, and redemption in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories. Your support means everything. Until next time, partners.